Matthew Evans was the kind of man who always had things his way. Retired, wealthy, and proud. He lived in a mansion on the outskirts of town and drove his gleaming silver Mercedes like a trophy of all he had achieved. But that summer afternoon in Kentucky, all his wealth couldn't save him. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell. Because here we tell real-life lessons through real and relatable stories. The Mercedes sat still on the roadside, one tire completely flat. The air conditioner hummed faintly, failing to cut through the suffocating heat. Matthew drummed his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. He had tried calling roadside assistance. No signal. He tried waving down cars, but traffic was scarce. For the first time in a long time, Matthew felt powerless. And then in the distance, a shadow appeared. Not a tow truck. Not a helpful passerby. But a young boy, no older than 14, wearing a faded t-shirt and worn sneakers, walking down the dusty road with determination in his step. Matthew frowned. What could a child possibly do for him? He was about to find out. The boy's name was Elijah. His eyes scanned the Mercedes, then landed on Matthew. He gave a small nod, polite but confident. "Got a flat, sir?" Elijah asked, steady voice cutting through the silence. Matthew hesitated, a mix of relief and unease washing over him. Yes, I do. Tried calling for help but no luck. Elijah crouched without hesitation. "I can help with that. My grandpa taught me last summer." Matthew blinked. This boy didn't have tools, didn't have money, didn't even have decent shoes, and yet he spoke with more certainty than most men Matthew knew. Within minutes, Elijah had the trunk open, the tools out, and was loosening the bolts with quick, practiced motions. Matthew watched in stunned silence as the boy worked. By the time the spare tire was secured, Elijah stood, brushing dust from his hands. He flashed a small smile. "All done, sir." Matthew reached for his wallet, pulling out a thick wad of cash. "Here. Take this. You've earned it." But Elijah stepped back, raising his hand. "Thank you, sir. But I don't need anything. Just happy to help." And with that, the boy turned and walked away. Matthew stood frozen. Money still in his hand. For the first time in years he felt small. That night, Matthew sat in his study, the quiet tick of the grandfather clock echoing in the room. His untouched dinner sat on the tray beside him. He had encountered thousands of people in his life. Investors, partners, employees. Every exchange had a price. Every smile came with expectation. But that boy had walked away without asking for a single thing. The worn sneakers. The dust on his jeans. Everything about him said he had so little, and yet he refused money from a man who had everything. Matthew swirled his glass of scotch slowly. He thought of his childhood, long buried under decades of success. He had once been like that boy. Humble. Grateful. Full of integrity. But somewhere along the way he had traded all that for wealth and power. For the first time in years, Matthew couldn't sleep. He needed to see that boy again. The next morning, Matthew drove back to the same stretch of road. No sign of Elijah. So he stopped at diners, gas stations, small shops, describing the boy to anyone who would listen. Most shrugged. A few shook their heads. Hours slipped by. Finally, at a small cafe, an older woman behind the counter paused. "Sounds like you're talking about Elijah. That boy's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama in Harlan." An hour away, nestled deep in the Appalachians. The drive was scenic, winding through rolling hills and quiet farmland. But Matthew barely noticed. His mind was racing. Who was Elijah? What kind of family raised someone like that? And why did Matthew feel so compelled to find him? When he finally reached Harlan, he saw modest homes lining the streets. Children on bicycles. Neighbors chatting on porches. A far cry from the gated isolation of his own neighborhood. He asked around until someone pointed to a small, weathered house on the edge of town. Matthew parked his Mercedes in front of the sagging porch. For a moment he just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, wondering what he was even doing. Then, taking a deep breath, he knocked. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s. Tired eyes, kind face. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. Matthew cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am. I believe I met your son yesterday. Elijah. He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression softened instantly. "That sounds like my Elijah. Always helping someone." She stepped aside. "Come on in. He's out back. You're welcome to wait." Matthew entered. The house was small but clean. Faded furniture, mismatched chairs, hand-drawn pictures taped to the walls. It was nothing like his mansion, yet somehow it felt warmer. Out back, Elijah was hammering a board into a leaning fence. When he saw Matthew, his eyes widened. "Hey, mister," Elijah said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Didn't expect to see you again." Matthew smiled, feeling oddly nervous. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you did. You helped me when I really needed it, and I wanted to thank you properly." Elijah shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. But to Matthew it was. Matthew stood in the yard, his hands tucked into his pockets, while Elijah leaned against the half-fixed fence. Matthew replied, "You know, not many people would have stopped to help a stranger on the side of the road." Elijah tilted his head, puzzled. "Why not? You needed help. I could help. So I did." Matthew gave a small chuckle, almost embarrassed. "It's just, people usually want something in return." Elijah shook his head firmly. "My mama says if you can do good, you should. Even if nobody's watching. That's what matters." For a moment, Matthew couldn't respond. His gaze drifted toward the porch where Elijah's mother stood, her tired eyes filled with pride. He softened and said, "You've got a good head on your shoulders. Your mother must be proud." Elijah grinned. "She works hard. I just try to help where I can." Matthew shifted uncomfortably, his polished shoes sinking into the uneven grass. The memory of his own rough childhood flickered through his mind, so different from the marble floors he walked on now. Before he could say more, Elijah's mother stepped forward with a warm smile. "Would you care to stay for lunch, Mr. Evans?" "Matthew Evans," he answered. "Well, Mr. Evans, it's nothing fancy. But you're welcome." Matthew hesitated for a second. Boardroom lunches and upscale restaurants were what he knew, not humble kitchens with mismatched chairs. But something in her voice pulled him in. "I'd like that," he said. Inside, the table was plain but neatly set. The smell of roasted vegetables and fresh bread filled the air. As they ate, Elijah spoke about school, his dream of becoming an engineer, and the neighbors he often helped. Matthew found himself quietly listening, not leading, not negotiating, just listening. By the end of the meal, he leaned back and admitted softly, "You've got more heart than most men I know, Elijah." The boy only smiled, not realizing the depth of the compliment. But that smile stayed with Matthew long after he left, echoing louder than the ticking of the grandfather clock waiting for him back at his mansion. That evening, Matthew couldn't shake Elijah's words from his mind. The boy's simple kindness echoed louder than the ticking of his grandfather clock. The next day, Matthew found himself driving back to Harlan, not out of obligation but out of something new. When he pulled up to the small weathered house, Elijah was outside again, kneeling in the dirt, trying to fix the chain on an old rusty bicycle. His hands were stained with grease, but his smile lit up the yard when he saw Matthew's car. "Hey, Mr. Evans," Elijah called out, waving. "Didn't think you'd come back." Matthew stepped out, smoothing his jacket. "Well, I had some free time." He paused, watching the boy fight with the stubborn bike chain. "What are you working on there?" Elijah wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "It's my neighbor's bike. She couldn't ride it anymore. Figured I'd fix it up for her." Matthew raised a brow. "For free?" "Of course," Elijah replied, grinning. "She lets me borrow her lawnmower sometimes. Gotta return the favor." Matthew shook his head in disbelief. "You really don't expect anything back, do you?" Elijah shrugged. "Nah. Mama says we rise by lifting others. That's just how we live." Matthew crouched beside the boy, his expensive shoes dangerously close to the dirt. For the first time in years he didn't care. He grabbed the bike frame, steadying it while Elijah tugged the chain back into place. "Like this?" Matthew asked, his voice unsure. "Yeah, just hold it steady." "You're a natural," Elijah said with a grin. For a moment Matthew felt useful. Not as a CEO. Not as a wealthy man. But as a pair of helping hands. When the bike was finally fixed, Elijah hopped on, pedaled once and then braked sharply. "See? Good as new." Matthew clapped softly. "You're remarkable, Elijah. Not many boys your age would spend their time helping others like this." Elijah grinned, brushing his hands on his jeans. "It's just who I am." From the porch, his mother called out, "Elijah, don't keep Mr. Evans outside all day. Offer him some lemonade." Elijah laughed. "Come on, mister. Let's get you something cold." Inside the little kitchen, Matthew noticed again the mismatched dishes, the patched curtains, the old appliances that had seen better days. Yet despite the modest setting, there was warmth here that his marble countertops at home never gave him. As they sat, Elijah asked curiously, "So, what do you do, Mr. Evans?" Matthew hesitated. He wasn't used to explaining himself to children. But Elijah's wide, expectant eyes left no room for arrogance. I run a business. A big one. We design buildings, manage projects, things like that. Elijah's eyes lit up. Buildings? Like skyscrapers. Matthew chuckled. Yes. Skyscrapers, offices, bridges. Big things. Elijah leaned forward eagerly. That's amazing. I want to be an engineer one day. To build stuff people can use forever. Matthew froze. Something stirred inside him. That same ambition, that hunger to create, he had once felt it too, before the money, before the status. He cleared his throat. Engineering takes a lot of work. Math, science, long hours of study. Elijah nodded quickly. I don't mind. If it means I can build something that lasts, I'll work as hard as I have to. Matthew studied the boy's face, full of fire and determination. In that moment, he saw a younger version of himself, before greed had clouded his vision. Without thinking, he said, Elijah, would you like to come by my office sometime? I could show you around, let you see what engineers do up close. Elijah's jaw dropped. Really? You do that? Matthew smiled. I think you deserve the chance. From the doorway, his mother watched quietly, her hand pressed against her chest. She didn't interrupt, but her eyes glistened with gratitude. As Matthew drove away later that evening, the dusty streets of Harlan fading in his rearview mirror, he realized something had shifted. He had come here to thank a boy for kindness, but instead, that boy had given him something far more valuable. A week later, Elijah found himself standing in front of the towering glass building that housed Matthew's company. The skyscraper gleamed under the sun, its reflection stretching across the city streets. Elijah craned his neck, eyes wide with wonder. Wow, he whispered under his breath. It's like it touches the sky. Matthew, standing beside him, smiled faintly. Come on. Let's go inside. The security guards greeted Matthew with a respectful nod, their gazes briefly lingering on the boy at his side. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Men and women in sharp suits hurried past, clutching tablets and files, barely sparing a glance. Elijah's sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor as he followed Matthew toward the elevators. He tilted his head, marveling at the giant chandelier that glittered above. In the elevator, Elijah stared at the glowing floor numbers as they ascended. So this is where you work every day? Matthew adjusted his cufflinks, his tone calm. Yes. It's a very different world from Harlan. When the doors slid open, Elijah stepped into a hallway lined with glass offices. Assistants paused, whispering, their eyes flicking between the wealthy CEO and the boy in worn jeans at his side. Matthew ignored them. He pushed open the door to his own office. The space was enormous, walls of glass overlooking the city, shelves lined with awards, models of skyscrapers displayed proudly on pedestals. Elijah froze, his jaw dropping. This is incredible. He moved closer to one of the scale models, his fingers hovering above it without touching. Did you really design these? Matthew nodded. My team and I, yes. Elijah crouched, studying every angle, every beam. It's like building dreams out of steel and glass, he murmured. Matthew watched him silently, something stirring inside. For years he had walked past these models without a second thought, seeing them only as trophies of success. But through Elijah's eyes they felt alive again, symbols of vision, not profit. After a long pause, Elijah turned. One day I want to build something like this. Something people will remember. Matthew swallowed, his voice quieter than usual. And you will. You've got the heart for it. Elijah grinned, the city skyline gleaming behind him. For the first time in years, Matthew felt pride, not for himself but for someone else. A few days later, Elijah returned home from school, his backpack slung loosely over his shoulder. As he turned the corner onto his street, he froze. There, in front of his small weathered house, sat a sleek black truck. Workers were unloading lumber, paint cans, and fresh supplies onto the lawn. The sound of hammers and drills filled the air. Elijah dropped his backpack. Mama, what's going on? His mother stood on the porch, her hand covering her mouth in disbelief. I don't know, baby. Matthew stepped out from behind the truck, dressed simply this time, no suit, no tie. Just a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up. Thought your fence could use a stronger fix, Matthew said with a small smile. Elijah blinked, stunned. Mr. Evans, you did this? Matthew shrugged lightly, though his voice carried a softness Elijah hadn't heard before. Let's just say I know a few people who like to keep busy. The workers moved with precision, replacing rotten boards, repainting walls, patching the roof. Elijah darted around, watching every step, eyes wide with amazement. "This is crazy," Elijah said, his voice bursting with excitement. "Our house is gonna look brand new." Matthew chuckled. "Not brand new. Just the way it deserves to be." From the porch, Elijah's mother called out, her voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Evans, this is too much. We can't possibly repay you for this." Matthew turned, meeting her gaze. "You already have. Your son reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that helping others is worth more than anything money can buy." Elijah's mother wiped at her eyes, unable to speak. Elijah ran over, tugging at Matthew's sleeve. "Can I help too?" Matthew crouched slightly, handing him a paintbrush. "Of course. Every good builder starts somewhere." The boy's face lit up as he dipped the brush into a bucket of white paint and carefully stroked it across the fence. For the first time in a long while, laughter and hope filled the little yard. As the sun began to set, the once faded house stood taller, brighter, like a promise made visible. And Matthew, standing there with paint on his hands, realized it wasn't just wood and nails being rebuilt. Something inside of him was being restored too. Weeks later, the little house in Harlan stood straighter, brighter. Elijah still spent afternoons fixing bikes and helping neighbors, but his eyes carried a new light, the spark of possibility. One evening, Matthew arrived, carrying an envelope. Elijah ran to meet him, grease still on his hands from tinkering with a broken radio. "Mr. Evans." Elijah grinned. "Guess what? My teacher said I might qualify for an early engineering program one day." Matthew smiled, holding out the envelope. "I know. That's why I spoke to a few people at the university." Elijah blinked in confusion. "University?" Matthew placed the envelope in his hands. Inside was a letter with the university's seal. Elijah's mother gasped from the porch, covering her mouth. Matthew explained gently, "This is a scholarship. It will cover your tuition, books, everything you need. So when the time comes, nothing will stand in your way." Elijah's eyes filled with tears. You did this for me?" Matthew's voice softened. "No, Elijah. You did this for yourself. I just opened the door. You're the one who earned it, with your heart, your determination, and your kindness." Elijah hugged the letter to his chest, his small frame trembling. His mother stepped forward, her eyes wet with gratitude. "Mr. Evans, we can never repay you." Matthew shook his head. "You already have. Your son reminded me of who I used to be, and who I want to be again." As the sun sank behind them, Elijah whispered, "I won't waste it. I promise." And Matthew smiled, knowing this boy would one day build more than bridges or buildings. He would build a future. No matter where you come from, no matter what you have, remember this. True wealth isn't about what you keep, it's about what you give. Matthew thought he was teaching Elijah about success. But in the end, it was Elijah who taught him the greatest lesson of all. Kindness builds bridges stronger than any skyscraper. What about you? Where are you watching this from? And what lesson did you take away from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. And if you believe more people should hear stories like Elijah's, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.